Welcome to Dr. Paul, Mental Health Mondays. I'm Dr. Paul. Welcome. Every Monday, I do Mental Health Mondays here on my podcast channel and my live YouTube channel. So I know YouTube is starting up and it's doing its thing over there. And I have anyone who needs to ask questions can ask me on my YouTube Live, can ask me on Instagram Live, can ask me on my Facebook Live. So with that, I'm going to get into Mental Health Mondays. So Mental Health Mondays is about talking about mental health. Today's a crazy important Monday that we have. Why is that? Well, tomorrow is the election day. Well, the final day for you to cast your vote live in person. Now, through all of COVID, there has many things been on the rise between suicide, drug overdose, abuse in the homes. Just everything when it comes to emotion has gone up. All of it. And we've talked about that before, and we've mentioned that here on Mental Health Mondays. So, last Monday, I said I wanted to go over anger. Because what troubles me the most when it comes to mental health, as you know, I'm an emotional science guy. I teach in emotional science is how it affects your body, the causal and effect of what you think and what your thoughts are, and how it affects your body on a cellular level, right? Breaking down the brain and how it affects you and how it can be regulated or at least understood. Because if you're not understanding how your brain works and how it's affecting you, then it just runs havoc. I did a whole series on the emotional brain, back in the early part of the pandemic, and the different sections of how we live our life between the logical and emotional and, strategic. I'm drawing a blank. But anyway, my mind's drawing a blank. And I talked about the week before how the mind and the brain are different. The brain is a processor. The mind is the action part, right? It is the thought process. It's the development part. So when people say that you're being brainwashed, that's just not true. You're being mind-washed. Your brain is just a chemical transmitter and a receiver. That's all it does. So what is anger? I find it difficult to talk about emotions because it brings up a lot of emotions. People are very hostile when it comes to talking about emotions and talking about what it means to them. And therein lies the problem. What it means to them. Let's see. When it comes to anger, and I'll put that here. So, where does anger come from? Okay? How is anger? Most people say anger is an action. Some people say anger is a feeling. What's the difference between a feeling and an action? These could be thoughts, and these could be the things you do, right? So you've heard the people say, it's okay to be angry, it's just how you show it. Okay. I'm not going to give you or persuade you between is it an action or is it a feeling. But I want you to understand a couple things. Anger, in the science part of it, is first you have the amygdala. You have the amygdala, okay? And in the amygdala, we know it's the oldest part of the brain. We know we have sensory action. Now, these are all brain. Okay? So, you have the frontal lobe. You have the cortex involved, central, right? You also, it could be genetic. It could be the thymus. So it could be the forebrain. There's a lot here that has a lot to do with anger. And a lot of them don't have anything to do with each other. They have connection because our whole body has connections, but how they get their information. And you may have heard this before when I talk about when the brain receives something, where does it go? So you have sympathetic pathways. You have sympathetic pathways. I guess it looks like you can't see it within the camera. So you have the amygdala, you have sensory action, you have frontal lobe, you have cortex, you have the central cortex. It could be genetic, it could be the forebrain, it could be the thymus, it could be sympathetic pathways. It could be, so if the brain is receiving information, and that's what it does, because after it receives information, it changes everything into a chemical. And in that chemical, there's movement. We're just talking about anger. I'm not even talking about is it an action or is it a feeling. So if we break down, when I ask people, what makes you angry? It could be environmental. So if it comes in a movement, it could be environmental. Right? And it could be also internal energy. Being disruptive. Because anger, all of its meaning just means unbalance. Well, that's how I view anger. It's just an unbalance. Now, Dr. Paul, are all feelings or thoughts or action creates an unbalance? And that's where the martial science comes in. Because when you're studying and when I'm teaching martial sciences, and this it has a lot to do with my brothers and sisters out there, what is balance? Balance means an understanding between both hemispheres, the spiritual self, the soulful self, and the mental self. Mind, body, spirit. A balance of understanding. I'm not talking about is your understanding right or wrong, better or less. I'm talking about a balanced understanding between the spiritual self, the soulful self, the mental self, on all levels. That's what balance is. Can something be unbalanced in any of those planes? Absolutely. Absolutely. And in that unbalance sends information to these parts. And we're not even talking about the things you do, because parts of this brain here triggers the physical through a chemical response, through sympathetic pathways that has been developed by your thoughts or your reaction to the thought. That's why I teach emotional reaction science. Most of my stuff is emotional reaction training. Understanding how your body's going to react with a thought you're going to have, by the chemical it's going to produce, by the information it's going to send to these parts of the brain that triggers hand movement, leg movement, eye movement. That's why when you hear people say, well, expressions all in the face. No, it's not. It starts in the information of the chemical which triggers different nerves that changes the face. So it's not in the face. It's all how your thoughts is sending the signals into the brain to form the chemical that triggers the facial reaction. So it sounds like, Dr. Paul, you're talking about anger's thoughts. Well, no, not really. Because if anger surpasses things and starts in the amygdala, which is the oldest part of the brain, that means it never comes to the fore part of the brain. That means here in the amygdala, we know as freeze, flight, or fright. Right? Freeze, flight, or fight. Survival. If it never reaches the central cortex, and it goes and everything is sent out through the amygdala, that's a different chemical, what's going to move your legs to run like hell or do whatever, because it's nothing but a survival. But if your anger thoughts come through the thymus, now there's different responses. There's a different endocrine system that kicks off. There's a different chemical that happens. So, I'm not going to get too far into these because I have to break it down, but I want you to look it up. The occipital lobe is in here, all those. The pineal gland is in here. You called it the third eye when people open up their chakras, right? When people are talking about opening up their chakras, it releases all these chemical responses and it has a different change in effect. Hence why we meditate. It changes the chemical responses that the brain may have with the thoughts or the reaction. So you see, anger, if you want more information about anger and how it affects you, please write me. You can always write me or hit me up at drpaulwdyer@gmail.com and ask those questions. Or put it on the messages on the YouTube or on Facebook or wherever you see it, right? Or any other social. And just ask the question, inbox me, right? Because anger is not just a thing. What about I see down here, Dr. Paul, it's genetics. Yeah. Hereditary information. Cells being passed down from generation to generation of how I'm going to respond to something, because that's the cells I picked up from my ancestors. That's what I am enhancing. My mama handled anger this way. This is how I handle anger. My daddy handled anger this way. This is how I handle it. My neighborhood handles this way. That's the environment. I had to learn how to handle anger because it's the school I went to. It's the prison I've been in. It's the shelter I went in. It's the trauma that triggers all this chemical to go unbalanced and haywire. And you not knowing what's so unbalanced. That's what trauma is. That's why we talk about trauma so much on mental health. We talk about, I know, from the sound of my voice to the next century, you have been traumatized. Get professional help. Have a doctor check you out like you would your car and an oil change. Check your mental health. This pandemic has uncovered a lot of things that has been sickening us. And you not knowing how to handle it, which I don't like the word handle, means to manipulate in my mind. I'm going to handle this. It means to manipulate. You're not really solving the problem, you're manipulating it. And if you manipulate it, it just twists it. And if you twist it, that means it changes a chemical response in your internal. So you're not really handling anything. You're not really handling it. It's handling you. Take your time. Take your time. And be okay with not being okay. But I tell you this. After all this, you may be right by one thing. And I will agree to this. Just because you're angry doesn't mean you have to be violent. It doesn't mean you have to be violent to others or yourself. Whatever you think anger is, doesn't mean you have to be violent to others or yourself. Get help. Ask for help. Accept help. Believe that you can be helped. Know that you're worth getting help. You're worthy. You are worth it. Your life depends on it. Our lives depend on it. We cannot do this without you. Don't let anger destroy our civilization. Don't let anger destroy humanity. Don't let anger create an environment that doesn't want you to live. Because that's what anger does. After all the chemical thoughts, wherever how you want to put it, anger kills. Without prejudice, without bigotry, it kills everything and all things. Inside of you and outside of you. I'm Dr. Paul. Mental Health Mondays. We're going to keep unpacking anger and how we can solve it. I'd like to thank everyone for listening to. Remember, we have an important day tomorrow, and I know that many of you are in distress for whatever reason. This is the last broadcast until we get a new president, and we'll probably be talking about that with next Mental Health Mondays and how you feel and how to be okay with things and forgiveness. We're going to go over forgiveness next Monday. But until then, no matter what, no matter who, no matter when, no matter where, know that you are loved. You are cherished. and you are needed. I'm Dr. Paul. Thank you for listening to Mental Health Mondays.